I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig, and this is the Ayn Rand Fan Club. William, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. We've got a big guest I'm very excited about, controversial. We'll see what kind of blowback we get from the general community. But this is one of the most well-known names in the history of objectivism, the founder of the Atlas Society in 1990, author of many books, including The Evidence of the Senses, Unrugged Individualism, The Theory of Abstraction, Truth and Toleration in Objectivism, The Art of Reasoning. It's Dr. David Kelley. Dr. Kelley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Great, great. I was a fan of yours going back to the 90s, and just in case there's a question about whether or not we're, in fact, sanctioning you by having you on, I'll go ahead and pronounce my judgment. I think you're probably the most unfairly maligned person in the history of the movement. And I say that as someone who's actually gained a tremendous amount of respect for Leonard Peikoff in the last year in the wake of his Trump support.
I may be the most maligned, although I think Nathaniel Brandon would be a pretty strong candidate if we were competing.
Well,
we never did.
That's very noble. I think it's probably close, but the fact that, yes, he did have some writings on objectivism in the early days and the spread of objectivism, but just your intellectual works and that have just been excluded from the objectivist scene. I think that's a crime against justice. But I actually kind of see this as having you on as a bit of a test, not for you or us, but for orthodox objectivism. They kind of say that, it's a new day, that, there's no more index of forbidden books. And I was told that by prominent objectivists, and I believe that and want to believe that. And so hopefully this will be a positive experience, and we can just focus on the positive, because I feel like I experienced some of the same blowback as you over the years, not nearly to the same degree, but just in terms of being in an objectivist group and someone saying my ideas didn't align right. And so we're going to get into all of that, but I want to start at the beginning. I understand that you gave a kind of eulogy or poem for Frank O'Connor, Ayn's husband, and then for Ayn Rand herself. So I'm curious just a little bit of how you got involved with Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff in the 70s and how that came to happen.
Okay, it's kind of a long story, but I think I can summarize briefly. I'd been interested in Ayn Rand since high school. And then in college, I studied her works more deeply because I was majoring in philosophy. And then after I finished graduate school, had my PhD, and was I moved to New York City and got to know some of the people in the movement, including Leonard. And so I began teaching at Vassar College, but I was close enough that I could stay in touch with people and see them occasionally. Right. So, there was a group of people: Harry Binswanger, Mike Berliner, though he was in California at the time, various others, Peter Schwartz. And so, we just worked together on stuff. I was busy teaching as a philosophy professor at Vassar, but I was doing occasional writing, like for Peter Schwartz, or and then after the Ayn Rand Institute was formed in 1985, I began doing some talks. I was on their speakers bureau, but then Barbara Brandon's book came out, and I'm sorry, let's go back a step. So when Frank O'Connor died, it just happened. Leonard was looking. The only ceremony was to be the reading of a Kipling poem, When Earth's Last Picture is Painted, and that's all that he and I wanted. So Leonard said, "I'm too emotional to do that. but he knew that we had taken some voice lessons. So he said, well, maybe I could do it. So I said, of course, yeah. And then, so I did. And then when Ayn Rand passed away, he asked me again. And again, it was only a poem being read. In that case, it was Kipling's poem, If.
Right.
So that was the extent of it. I was just, I didn't have a professional voice or professional acting talent, but I guess, it was better. It was more important for someone who knew both of them at least a little bit, and was obviously someone who cared.
Yeah. Still a fascinating part of the history. Okay, so then there is a movement that's coming about. ARI is coming into existence in the 80s, and this is around the time Barbara's book comes out, and you're taking kind of a role in the organization. You're not completely part of ARI, but you're kind of doing maybe some work with them.
Oh yes. I didn't go to the meeting where ARI was founded, that Ed Snyder, the businessman in Philadelphia, and he had called people together. Let's start some group. This has been, I think, 84. And so he agreed to fund the first year if they had a viable plan, which they came up with the essay contest. So I was not at that meeting, but I knew everyone who was, and I knew Ed, including Ed Snyder. So they at some point, I can't remember exactly when, they formed a speakers bureau, began providing some funding for campus clubs to bring speakers in. So I began doing that. I don't know, I probably gave at least a dozen over a couple of years, maybe more. And meanwhile, I had been working, going back even somewhat before Barbara, even the ARI was founded. I've been working on my book, The Evidence of the Senses, and Leonard would review some of the chapters and give me feedback on those, and also on a couple of essays, The Theory of Abstraction. And it was, it was great feedback. So.
And he seemed to generally like what you were doing.
I think so, yeah. I mean, at the time.
Right.
The tone certainly changed after Barbara Brandon's book came out.
Yeah, so what happens there? I've heard you describe that there was kind of a change in the mood there after that.
Well, when that book came out, we knew it was going to be it was going to have an important impact. No one knew exactly what until without reading it. But Barbara Brennan had been very close to Rand over 20 years, had been a major figure in the 60s, and yet she obviously had was part of the split with Ayn Rand and had gone off. And so anyway, it was a book I had to read. I don't enjoy reading, particularly about, people's relationships over history, but it was kind of a professional necessity. And I was on the board of a tiny little newsletter, Objectivist newsletter, that published a review by Robert Bidinato. And the review was basically positive. And I can't remember whether there were any points I disagreed with. But anyway, it was certainly acceptable. I thought it was not disrespectful to Rand. I mean, Robert Bidinato was a gung-ho objectivist. So,
well, so is this the point at which many people at ARI actually accepted the affair? That it had happened?
I've never been sure. I will just say I knew about it from the mid 70s. or early 80s, you know, there was a lot of talk among folks in New York that, you know, kind of, I was living with a woman and her friends, and they were all, I mean, you know, we socialized in a certain group.
Right.
And basically, it was soon enough after 68 that people were still saying, do you believe this? And the women said, of course. What do you think? And the men were saying, I don't know. I think the evidence is not conclusive. And, you know, we were all being logical philosophers. So anyway, someone who knew just said, I just finally asked someone, and he said, yeah, it happened. This was long before Barbara's book came out. So it was no surprise to me. But apparently it was to some people. Within months of the book's coming out, Leonard and I had a meeting where I said, I just asked him, do you think Barbara could have been making this up out of whole cloth? And he said, I regard it as arbitrary statements, insufficient evidence. And I don't know, that passed my plausibility barrier. And that was the beginning of the end. That was in 86. That was, but after that, you know, we didn't socialize much anymore, and then finally stopped working together shortly thereafter. So that was a turning point with Leonard. But I still was on the Speakers Bureau for a couple more years, and it was only when I wrote my question of sanction issue that that sealed my fate, so to speak.
Right. So there was this Libertarian Supper Club
Right.
that you were invited to speak to. And, you know, is anyone at ARI saying, you know, I wouldn't go if I were you, or anything like that?
No, I knew people at Laissez-Faire Books, and including Andrea Rich, who's the owner and operator. And I'd been leery about accepting any invitations to do things with libertarians, but I had done some. I debated Nat Hentoff at a libertarian meeting about libel laws, free speech, but this was so anyway. I'd been leery about it, and so I asked the organizer. It might have been Roy Childs himself. I asked the organizer, well, how about this? What if I come and talk about why the freedom movement needs objectivist philosophy to be successful?
Right.
And thinking, okay, I'm putting you on the spot. You can have me, but only if I get to, you know, say my mind about, you know, how to do things, and be, you know, and if necessary, criticize other libertarians. And the response was great. We love that so much. So I figured, okay, they invited me to come speak as an objectivist. So what's not?
It's not seem like a sanction if you're trying to convert them.
Well, yes, that was a point. And, you know, I haven't reread all the stuff from those years, but I was just looking at something from Peter Schwartz wrote. I don't know. It's one of those things.
Well, he was the one who originally questioned you speaking to the libertarian group in the first place.
Yeah, right.
And then you wrote a question of sanction in response to that.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. I gave that talk to the Supper Club in the fall, in one fall, and then the next spring, I opened my copy of The Intellectual Activist, and there is an attack on sanctioning the sanctioners. Who's doing that? And it did not mention my name, but it was pretty obvious from the description that it was me. So that we got my my rile up, but also got me thinking about where is this coming from. So anyway.
And so at this point, I mean, you're still somewhat affiliated. You still are somewhat friendly with some of these people. Or are they getting a little colder to you?
Well, yeah, I guess so. But I remember sending when I wrote A Question of Sanction, I made 30 copies and mailed them. There was no internet. Things have been totally different today. But I sent out 30 copies, including one to Schwartz, one to Peacock, and I thought Leonard would say, "Oh, okay, yeah, Peter, just chill for a while. David's right." And I was stunned when he came back saying the exact opposite. So, I mean,
Right.
I was naive, I guess, but
Now, he wrote Fact and Value in response to A Question of Sanction. I think a lot of people get confused and they think Fact and Value was in response to Truth and Toleration, which you wrote in response to Fact and Value.
that's correct. Yes.
And so that was you still hoped for some sort of response from that at that point, but that was the point at which they said, we're not going to address this anymore.
I guess so. Well, but I wasn't expecting anything. I just thought I thought about it, and I just, I could have said, okay, Fact and Value. I think it's poorly argued, and reflects the kind of attitude that I don't like, that I thought had been, cleaned out of objectivism. And I could have walked away and just worked on my logic textbook, found a teaching job. But it just bothered me enough that I'd learned so much and spent so much time appreciating the depth and power of Ayn Rand's ideas that I couldn't do that. So I felt, well, the alternative was to respond and try to. At the time, it took me a year to write Truth and Toleration. Okay. I was teaching, but it was a calendar year. A full 12 months. So I had a lot of time to think. And during that time, ARI removed me from their speakers bureau. I got tons of letters denouncing me, and there was various arguments began back and forth. I guess people who knew anything about technology were doing email already. So there was a lot of email back and forth on discussion lists. And the hostility level was pretty high among the things I saw. So
where in this are you thinking about a new organization?
I think it was after Fact and Value was the spring of '89. So I was just writing, but I was also talking with George Walsh, who was a very good friend, as well as a mentor and objectivist colleague. And he was in New York at the time, and we just thought, we got to do something. It's okay it's fine to write what you're writing, David, he said, but we could do something permanent to embody the spirit of openness and outreach and willingness to engage in debate with people. And so that idea just grew on us and grew on us. So we over the winter, we put it together, and we formed it in January of 1990. So the idea grew out of some of the things I was developing, some of the ideas about openness, tolerance, the distinction between moral judgment, the distinction between error and evil in people's belief systems. And then it just seemed more and more like, no, this is good, this is solid, and it's an alternative way, not an alternative theory of objectivism. It's a different application and practice of it. But it's important because the movement has to practice a certain way if it's going to have any acceptance. And so by the time I began work after Fact and Value and after, ARI saying you're out, I just said, okay, this is work. There's never, I'd seen enough of these splits before. As I've said, there's a kind of a natural history in
sure, patterns,
intellectual movements that. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I read Truth and Toleration. I think it's renamed The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand, but I read it in the 90s, and there are a couple of parts that I really just loved. First, I think it's in the context of going to speak at the Libertarian Club without sanctioning them. You basically identify 4 levels of judging someone. And I've memorized them: observing actions, inferring motives, identifying a character trait, and then finally judging the person. I think that's crucial nuance that all objectivists could benefit from. I'm just curious if you expand on those in any of your other lectures or books.
I worked that out. I don't think totally from the get-go, because I had taught ethics, and anyone who goes through philosophy, undergraduate and then graduate school, is going to have studied some ethics and contemporary ethical theories and so forth. So I was familiar with distinctions like motive versus results, and different theories emphasize one or the other. Anyway, but I did have to do a little thinking in writing that. And I was going mainly on my sense of objectivism, and then my experience. What is a rational, logical way to go about these judgments and the different kinds? But I don't think that I have ever really expanded on that. My main interest in philosophy is logic and epistemology. So I have ended up writing a fair amount about ethical issues,
sure,
and political issues, of course. But no, I'm afraid not.
Well, I'm curious what you think regarding our own interests. Do you agree that we should maybe aspire to be agents of causality? For example, if someone mistreats us, isn't it's almost kind of rational to get a little bit pissed off at them with just respect to the levels of judging someone, at least?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Every interaction, I suppose there's some purely random interactions we might have where someone scowls at us on the subway station, and who cares? But if there's any significant interaction, even casual and temporary, we're always evaluating. Some of the evaluation is not moral per se. It's, do I understand this person? Why are they asking me that? Or, can I trust them if I ask for directions, whatever? And so, yeah, now sometimes you can pose the question, and finding out, coming to some kind of certain definite conclusion, is this right or wrong, especially when you get to the levels of motive and character, and certainly the whole person, then you can, and I would say this is the majority of the case for most of us, you don't have enough evidence, and it's not worth acquiring it. You just go on what you have and get on with your life. But
yeah, to a certain extent, I guess I'm thinking of it more specifically in relation to kind of a libertarian and even objectivist cheek turning and not responding to leftist attacks on capitalism and individualism. And, they'll do it one day and gaslight us, and then they'll good cop us the next day and expect us to be all chummy until they're ready to attack us as bigots again.
Yeah. Well, if someone is gaslighting me, that's the end of it for them. I mean, it's then their responsibility to say sorry, because that is I take any such thing as involving hostility, and hostility is not something that I expect from people or will tolerate. I will often just say, okay, bye.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I value my time, and I don't want to waste time just blowing back at people just for the sake of making my judgment clear. Yes, that's a separate decision. Is it worth it? Is it worth my time and effort?
Right.
And sometimes it is, like, for example, if there's someone else in the situation who, I want to make it clear to them that I don't put up with this. And even if I have no chance of convincing the person the person who attacked me. Right.
Even within political tolerance, it's still, you're supposed to react when someone's a jerk to you.
Yeah.
If I can jump in real quick.
Go ahead.
One of the problems with communicating with other people is psychological in nature. So not only do you need to figure out if what they're saying is damaging to you at a reputational level, but you also, I think, need to figure out whether they're damaged psychologically, and how do you respond to them given what they're doing psychologically. Like if they are maybe young and innocent and don't realize what they're saying is harming you, or don't realize that they're making a terrible error, then maybe you don't have to tolerate their behavior, but you can just sort of put it aside or dismiss it and then deal with the underlying problem. Do you have any ideas on how to deal with people like that?
Let's pursue that a little bit, Wayne, because I'm not sure I fully understand. Maybe I could. Okay, go ahead.
Let's say you're dealing with a young libertarian, and he gets emotional, when you start arguing that libertarianism needs this egoistic foundation or something sets him off, and he starts calling you dishonest or rude or whatever, calling you names. How do you decide when to respond to what he's actually saying, like the ad hominems, versus just ignoring that and dealing with some sort of psychological issue he's got, maybe like pointing out a fact that he might be missing, which might help him, realize that he's not connected to reality?
It's a real judgment call. If something like that occurred, say at a conference, or in the extreme case, if I were giving a talk and I got a hostile question in the Q&A, I would, what I should do, and what I believe would be the best thing, I have to acknowledge I don't always do this because I'm reluctant to start or add fuel to a conflict situation. So often I diffuse it, sometimes with humor, that I hope makes the point that I'm not taking this too seriously. And so I can get to the issues. But if it persists, at some point you have to say, look, where's this hostility coming from? what have I said that is harming you? Or words to that effect. And, address it because, and again, it probably matters whether this is a private conversation or something happening in public, because in public, at least if you are there as a speaker, participant in something, your entire performance is part of the persuasive effort, part of what you represent. It's not just the logic of what you say. And but there are a lot of things here that it's very hard for me to formulate abstractly what the issues and differences are because they're so much of that is kind of one's own subconscious processing what and interpreting the other person's face, behavior, tone of voice, etc. That I don't think I have a better answer for you. Sorry.
That's fair. I want to just in Truth and Toleration, the other part that I think is so amazing in section 5, you give one of the best summaries I've seen about what makes objectivism distinct from other Enlightenment Aristotelian systems. And if I understand correctly, it's within the context of that definition. You're saying this is what you have to believe to be an objectivist. And then what's open is outside of that definition. So when people say they disagree with the open approach, isn't it at least, unjust or illogical for them to have made that pronouncement without having read what your definition is?
Yes, this is indeed a paradox. And I don't know of anyone, it's not anyone prominent or anyone I've seen, take that definition and critique it. Say, no, this point you say is essential. It's not really that essential, but this other point that you don't mention is there's one misunderstanding here that I have run into, and some of my critics have read it. I know.
Sure.
And that is in talking about the core moral philosophy of objectivism. I mentioned rationality and production, and I make the point that if someone came up with a good argument, that's consistent with everything else in objectivism, as I laid it out, that lying is not always wrong. So that we have to qualify our understanding of what honesty is as a virtue. And someone came back and said, well, no, if you believe that lying's okay. I didn't say lying's okay. I said there may be occasions if someone has a good argument, I'll listen to it. And anyway, this critic came back and said, no, lying is a is just totally incompatible with rationality. So if rationality is important, then that's a solid virtue and essential. Then so is honesty. And my answer is no. You don't understand what that definition does. By Rand's own theory, a definition condenses and underlies the other characteristics of what you're defining. So objectivism is, to me, it's everything I understand.
Right.
Just as, many people on the other side, well, objectivism is everything Ayn Rand understood. But that's the only possible understanding. So, but no, I'm trying to define it. But just as think about defining something in nature, like gold. Okay. At one time, all they knew was that gold was malleable, yellowish, and rare. Okay. Now we know a lot more about gold, and we know that it's not always yellowish. So we changed that. We changed our understanding. It's just the same stuff, and the definition underlies and implies the rest of our knowledge in that context, at that point in our intellectual growth. And I'd say the same. Defining a philosophy is much more complicated, but I'd say the same general principle applies. So I'm not saying anything that I don't include is not part of objectivism. I'm just saying, if someone comes along and says, no, one of these things that you are considered essential, I think that's false. I'd say, well, okay, how can you be an objectivist? We'll talk about your argument, but this is too central.
Right. And I want to talk about the open versus closed issue.
Yeah, William, just to step in for a moment, I actually heard Yaron Brooks say something about people that I thought sounded a lot like what I imagined as the open approach. I wanted to play that clip and then use that as a jumping off point for the open closed discussion.
Okay. Okay.
Objectivism has to get over intellectualism. In that sense, it has to accept, not embrace, accept disagreement. It has to accept different interpretations. It's going to have to accept people saying, Ayn was wrong on this point. I think this is the better way to say it. Not being objectivist, but still as part of seeking the truth. That's what I think she would have wanted. That's what I think an intellectual movement does. That's how it grows.
So it's nice to see they've started to come around, at least in the rhetoric.
Well, Yaron's statement there is very interesting and puzzling in several ways. One is that he's endorsing people who are offering different interpretations of objectivist principles or of Ayn Rand's works, and possibly saying, no, she's wrong on this, that, or point. But then he adds the qualification, not as an objectivist. Okay, so someone who challenges anything of Rand's, I take it, is still his official position, that is not an objectivist. But there's a separation between objectivism and truth here. And he said that explicitly on other occasions. I quote one in the new version of Truth and Toleration, that it's great for philosophers to pursue the truth, and but objectivism is if you end up thinking that the all of objectivism, that is all but only what Ayn Rand believed, if there's anything in there that is not true, then you're not an objectivist. You may be a good person. I've apparently failed that test, but there's
that's the maligned part.
He's cut. Let me put it this way. If you read Fact and Value again from 30 years ago, Leonard's attack on me, there's no question he's saying objectivism is true. And if you depart from objectivism, you're departing from the truth. Yaron is now distinguishing them. So that is at least a halfway step in our direction, I thought. And I've talked about this with, the other people working at the Atlas Society, and I think we all have that sense. So yeah, it's great. It's great. I hope it is taken to heart as part of the operating policy at ARISE, and they become more open to you know, the freer spirits among them, among their thinkers.
So I agree that being an objectivist means that you agree with the essential principles or aspects of the philosophy. And to define those essential aspects, we could even go to things that Ayn Rand said herself. She's a few times she summed up her philosophy in a nutshell and gave the
Right.
general principles in each area of philosophy. And I think if you disagree with any of those major overarching principles, you probably shouldn't call yourself an objectivist. But what I want to tackle is your view of open objectivism, because I think I might have a slight disagreement. I'm not sure what you actually mean by open objectivism or open philosophy. Do you mean that the philosophy of objectivism can be added to over time by people who were not Ayn Rand? Or do you mean that the movement of objectivism should embrace people who have disagreements with particular ideas Ayn Rand had, but agree on the essentials?
Well, both. The concept of open objectivism that we've developed at the Atlas Society has both an intellectual and a social component. The social one is we're open to discussion and debate with people. We do not refuse to talk with, for example, libertarians, because we assume ahead of time that they're irrational and it's wrong to sanction irrationality. No, we assume people are rational and until they prove otherwise. But there's a large scope for people to differ, especially in philosophy, on many reasons. It's a complicated subject. So not everyone who disagrees is evil or evasive or whatever. So that's the open, social part of the openness. But we also believe that objectivism is a philosophy. It is, and that's a body of knowledge about reality. And that body of knowledge, like any body of knowledge, should grow as we make more discoveries. For one thing, it obviously has to be applied to new areas. During Ayn Rand's lifetime, she didn't know anything about all the technological developments that have occurred since then, from life extension to the internet and everything else. So there is just a continual flow of topics that come up about which we need to extend the philosophy in the form of new applications. I don't think anyone at Leonard, or anyone else would deny that. But also there were issues in philosophy, important issues that are truly philosophical, that Ayn Rand just didn't get to. She herself admitted, I've never developed a theory of induction. So we need one. Well, lo and behold, ironically, Leonard Peikoff and David Harriman published a book called The Logical Leap, which presents an objectivist theory of induction. I began thinking about benevolence as a moral virtue and convinced myself that it really does have an important place. And I did that by looking at how it intersects with the other key virtues of objectivism. And so I think that's a good addition to the philosophy.
I was just going to say, I feel like my views on things like even momentum and moral equivalence and some of the thinking I've done represent original ideas, but under the closed system, I don't dare try to call that original objectivist thinking.
Yeah.
And it stifled other people from wanting to be objectivist thinkers, because you really can't be if it's closed.
I think there's a difference between objectivism and being an objectivist, or having an objectivist take. or view. I think objectivism is the set of ideas, philosophical ideas that Ayn Rand came up with and wrote and documented. But you can be an objectivist based on those ideas because you believe the essential principles she laid out. And then based on that, you can have an objectivist position because it's your position and you're an objectivist. So I think there is just some confusion, I think, over what objectivism is versus what an objectivist is. Because I don't think an objectivist cannot be Ayn Rand. There was only one Ayn Rand. So an objectivist.
But we can all have original ideas that add to the body of knowledge.
Yeah, but it's not Ayn Rand's body of knowledge. So I think one of the problems is she gave her philosophy a name. If she hadn't given it a name, we'd just all be Randians. And we'd be coming up with our own Randian interpretations or Randian philosophies, kind of like Aristotelians. You know, there aren't any real Aristotelians, I don't think, who believe everything Aristotle said. You know, they believe the essential tenets that they agree with that differentiate Aristotle from Plato and maybe some other Greek philosophers. And so then they define themselves as an Aristotelian based on that essential difference. So at some point, and I think, David, you brought this up in one of your talks or books, at some point, we're going to get to this where we differentiate objectivism from all other philosophies and we figure out what that essential difference is. And then from that point on, we'll just be objectivists based on that essential difference.
Well, I'm not sure I entirely follow you, William, because if you start by saying objectivism is a name for the philosophy Ayn Rand founded and means all but only what she established or anyway, what she believed. Whereas objectivists is a term that applies to people and derivatively to a movement of such people. And then you kind of circle back and say, well, if they're objectivists and they move on in terms of new knowledge, new applications, et cetera, that becomes part of objectivism. So we're circling back here. I'm not quite sure I understand how we got from Ayn Rand's, the content of her philosophical mind to something larger or more open.
Yeah, so objectivists who are not Ayn Rand would be applying her ideas. So their applications wouldn't be objectivism, they would be applications of objectivism. So it would be some new theory, or like Leonard Dim theory. It would be or your benevolence idea. It would be a new theory that comes out of objectivism.
Kelley's charged that they didn't have a theory of induction as part of what led to the book with Harriman. They're saying that he's right. And, so because it now has to be, if it's Leonard Peikoff writing, it's also part of objectivism because of his relationship with Ayn Rand. It just doesn't seem a fair standard that that's someone who can add new knowledge, but the rest of us can't have original ideas that are part of objectivist knowledge.
You'd have to base it on a principle Ayn Rand came up with.
I mean, I think my ideas are based on, all have roots in reality and the way Rand looked at things. And so, it's because of this view that it's her property and no one else can add to it, that it's not considered part of, objectivist thought, or not even debated whether it should be.
Well, let me jump in here for a second. At
Referee.
There was a meeting back in 2007, I think, that Yaron Brook, John Allison.
Yes, I have lots of questions about that.
Okay, but I just want to say that at one point I asked, is Leonard's work now part of the objectivist canon that is on a par with Rand's? And Euron caught himself and said, no, that's Leonard's work. And he says, he actually says in the preface to his book on the system of Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, that this is an interpretation of Ayn Rand's thought by one of her best students, and left it at that. So,
I know you're fond of semantics, so let me break this down. When you say objectivist canon, do you mean, I assume you mean works created by objectivists and not works created by Ayn Rand?
Well, yes, and I'm probably using the word canon a little loosely, because a canon normally means the body of works that are essential to a discipline. And it can be defined very widely, like, the canons of works in biology would include Darwin, not every technical article in the Journal of Entomology. But so it's really, on my view, there should be a canon of objectivism. Here are the great works. Here are the works that have been put forward by really intelligent people, thoughtful people. They're well argued. They've been debated and discussed. They've received, all kinds of critical tests and challenges, and they've survived. And that's how I think an intellectual movement grows. And so it will have a number of works. I consider some of Brandon's works, like certainly the psychology of self-esteem, and I think he's added other important ideas, mainly about self-esteem, also romantic relationships, that I would consider now part of objectivism. I think he would have too. And I think the benevolence, as I've argued, is a core to objectivism. And so I would now add it to that list. I hadn't written that book yet when I wrote Truth and Toleration. And I think I still have some questions about the logical leap, but I would certainly add that would be part of major works in objectivism. But of course, Ayn Rand her works are the bulk of that canon so far.
Yeah. And we're not going to solve the open close thing today. I don't know if you have much more on it, William, but I wanted to talk about, so after the split, after Truth and Toleration, I think I heard you mention this on a show, because you're someone who's an intellectual, you love, epistemology and ethics, and all of a sudden you're now in charge of this organization where you're doing fundraising, organizing conferences, fielding complaints, putting events together. What's that transition like?
Awful. No, it was, I'm partly being facetious. It was a complete change of, I was 40 years old when I started the organization, and I'd never managed an organization. I'd never created one. My life had been that for 10 years as a faculty member at Vassar, I was part of a department. I was never chairman. We made department decisions pretty much in meetings, but I didn't have all the administrative stuff that the chairman had to put up with. And after I left Vassar, I was a freelance writer. I answered to nobody but myself and my editors. And I had no assistants. I didn't manage anyone. So it was a complete transition. And I did it because I felt something has to be done. And I'm in the middle. I'm the point person on this. However, I know that just psychologically, in terms of what gives meaning to me, is not just discovery, but building something. Even when
Sure.
I'm writing, I'm building something, not just reporting what's in my head. And I got pretty excited about this and the challenge of it. I had no idea what the challenge was going to be. And when I started, I said, it may or may not work. But after 2 years of discovering how much support there was and how many people I'd never heard of who were flocking to take part, I said, okay, we got this. We're answering a need. Let's keep doing it. But honestly, I'm not a great fundraiser. I'm not a great administrator or strategist. And so
Neither of those guys at ARI. And, it's funny in a way, I mean, I'm sure they could probably relate to that because they would probably prefer to be doing intellectual work as well. And they're in the same situation. Not that you two would ever commiserate. But so you're going through, you're doing this, you're going along, and I actually watched your presentation, Truth and Toleration 20 Years Later from 2010, and you talked about a meeting in 2007, and this is where ARI tried to buy you out, basically to put Atlas Society out of existence. And Yaron's also talked about this meeting on his show, and we'll link to both in the description. But there were just several fascinating aspects to me I wanted to ask you about. First, just from a visual perspective, I was reminded of the movie The Godfather, where the top bosses would meet and each would have their assassin or bodyguard with them. But in this case, you both have your money man. You have John Aglioloro and he has John Allison. And so, it's like, obviously the big guns are out for this thing. So how did this come about? Whose idea was it for the meeting?
Well, it began when I believe Yaron and maybe John Allison were at a meeting of a group, the Philadelphia Society, I believe, in the spring of 2007. Ed Hudgens was our CEO at the time.
Sure.
And so he and John Aguiloro as well, who's one of our board members. And so they ended up sitting down for, I don't know, lunch or breakfast or something during the course of the conference. And it was the first time that I'm aware of that anyone, there was any such meeting between people on different sides of the Objectivist split.
Sure.
And I thought, well, this is great. I congratulated Ed. I said, you're making history here. And so then the idea was, okay, let's set up a meeting just where we can, we're not just talking in passing while we're at a different conference. Let's have a meeting just to discuss what I thought, and we thought, everyone at TIS thought, well, this is going to be a meeting to talk about our differences, and can we, is there any way we can, lower the tension? Yeah, right. And then we got into the meeting, and it turned out what they really wanted to do was shut us down and persuade John Aguiloro to join their board to and bring with him the rights to the movie.
Oh, right. The movie was starting to be produced. So they're your main money guy. They're just blatantly trying to flip him over.
Oh yeah. No, Scott, I'm sorry. Yaron would have set up meetings with John, just, fundraising visits and to Ed Snyder. And, we, whenever we had a chance, we didn't have many, try to talk with people that we knew were supporting ARI. We know that a significant number of our donors supported both groups, and that was fun with us. But anyway, so the meeting was, their agenda was very different from ours.
And so, I mean, Aglioloro sounds like a man of integrity, just because it would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to just, get whatever kind of glory from being on their board and, gaining mainstream acceptance or whatever. And it sounds like he backed you. So you guys have the meeting, and then they make the pitch to basically buy you out. And where does it go from there?
Well, no, they had sent a letter to the board actually before this meeting. Euron had said, look, we're bigger, we've got more resources. Why don't you just merge with us or let the Atlas Society go and just, switch your activities and support to us. And it was partly aggravated by something that had happened that same year. They were trying to create a position at a small college in Texas to fund a position there on objectivist philosophy. This
like
is
the ones at Duke or
right.
Boston, I think. Okay.
And but someone on the faculty there who began looking into this, and she said, well, wait a minute. Everyone they have suggested, I found out that everyone that the Anthem Foundation, that was the vehicle for the funding, was every person they were suggesting that we consider for the position was trained at the Ayn Rand Institute. But I found that there's another objectivist organization run by a PhD philosophy professor, David Kelley, and so they began looking at it, and she convinced, or she raised that issue, and the faculty said, we're not wild about having objectivism in our department to begin with, but if there's this exclusionary partisan version of it, no, we're not accepting that. So the Journal of Chronicle of Higher Education got wind of this, and among the other people they called was me, and I said, if they're at some point, I said something to the effect, I think, it's for scholars to refuse to consider other scholarly work because they don't like where the other people are in the agenda. I think that's the original sin of a scholar whose only commitment should be to the truth. And
to the left.
That particular statement didn't get quoted, but my opposition to the thing did. And
Okay.
That really riled. It was, I think, as much the statement as the school's refusal, which I had nothing to do with.
It's really their unwillingness to even put up a front like they were rational towards you that sounds like it cost them the scholarship.
Yeah.
This chair.
Right. I don't know.
And so you think that's part of the context of what was going on leading up to this meeting, that and the movie with Aglioloro?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. We talked about that incident at the Texas College. And by that point in time, I had gotten in touch with a woman there. And it turns out a former colleague of mine at Vassar was also in that department, and she confirmed it. So, and interestingly, this is such a rich detail. I'm sorry to digress, but
go ahead.
Professor Raphael was her name. It was a philosophy and religion department at this Texas college, as often happens in smaller places, that you have those two disciplines in the same department. Anyway, so her PhD was from the University of Chicago in religion, and her doctoral thesis, was about how works of epics, great works of art, get turned into doctrines. And I thought, I mean, she was focusing on Jesus and the Bible,
Okay.
and a few other things. And I thought, holy cow, what a preparation for dealing with objectivism. So anyway, they were very, Yaron and Allison were very upset. Again, naively, I'd sent Allison a copy of the article, and he was offended, and joined Yaron in saying, "You're just getting in our way. You're stymieing us." I think they thought that I had, been in cahoots with this school before.
You encourage them to not give them the chair.
Yeah, I'd never heard of them before until the Chronicle
Okay.
approached me.
So this is now this is in Allison's office. And
Yes.
this big bank building.
Yep.
Okay, so this is they're kind of butter you up for the big pitch to buy you out.
No, we just had set up the meeting. And it was, Allison was out of courtesy to, he was the wealthy donor to ARI, and occasionally to us on smaller scale. And I knew him. I liked him as a person, still do. But we were just meeting there because it was convenient. And he was still running BB&T Bank, one of the biggest in the country. He's a
Right.
busy guy. So we were it was a courtesy to meet with him at his place.
I think they were trying to, show you like, this is the promise of a unified objectivism with all this lavish wealth and the influence of a Fortune 500 CEO. But all right, that's just my speculation. But
So what strikes me about this episode is the attempt to essentially buy you out and try to get you to go away with money. It seems like they saw value in you, and you built up your organization to the point where you're competing with them, or at least getting in their way.
Yeah.
And so it seems like you wanted open discussion, and they wanted to just give you money to go away. It strikes me there's a stark difference in those two attitudes towards a movement and into ideological movement. It seems like on this issue, I sympathize with your side, because I think what ARI should be doing is engaging you in discussion and engaging your ideas and debating you, trying to figure out what's true and what's correct and what is objectivism and what an objectivist movement should be like.
Well, I agree. I think this was a business move for market share, and in part anyway. And
it's so philosophically unseemly to me, because let's take them at face value for a moment that they actually believe that you're a fraud. Isn't that just going to encourage other frauds to start their own objectivist organizations?
Well, you are more intelligent, at least in your cynicism, than I am. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think. I think they were. Look, I have from the get-go, I had a certain credibility as a Princeton PhD, and as a writer. Published a book on a major, first really significant book in epistemology within the objectivist movement, and had been a speaker to a lot of campus clubs. So, that's why I felt if there's going to be a separate organization, I have to be involved. But yeah, they have been. I've heard of other cases where, for example, a student club will one an advisor on the faculty who's maybe, more of a TAS person, or not really an objectivist. And they've come down hard on those people. But it's mostly if there's any TAS connection that they want to shut down.
Yeah, it's just a type of ignoring, a blanking out, if you will. I have come to the conclusion that either with Schwartz or Peikoff, there was something personal. They decided they didn't like you. And I justify that just partially because of the changing narratives over time. First, it was talking to libertarians, then it became the open closed thing, then it was for seeing the Brandons at your events, then it was, you calling yourselves objectivists, then it's just for existing. I think most recently it's for Jennifer Grossman's Ayn Rand impression. So take your pick, whatever it is, they just decided they don't want you involved.
Yeah, well, I think they don't want competition in general, but I think also that they have somehow I put this issue of open versus closed on the agenda. I'd never heard anyone talking about it before, and as I was saying in that Truth and Toleration 20 years later talk that you mentioned, Scott,
Right.
Before the conflict arose after Barbara Brandon's book, we debated all kinds of things. And there were technical issues in epistemology that I was about perception that I was writing about in the evidence of the census. Leonard would read a chapter and he'd say, I'd say, this is not what Ayn Rand said, but the evidence, psychological evidence now points that this is sensation. It's about sensation and perception. And he said, well, I'm not quite sure, but okay. And that was the end of it. There was no issue that, oh my God, you're not an objectivist. I can't work with you. It was just, good luck with the book. Until he was not stopped wishing me good luck with the book.
I feel like there's almost an analogy where ARI is almost like the existing left, and you guys are more like the liberty movement. And to some extent, because it goes back to this issue of the left starts to treat us like they don't even think we should exist, whether they're calling us bigots or child killers, or we want to kill seniors, or whatever argument from intimidation is meant to dehumanize or shut us up. And then that kind of same thing happens with the way that you've been treated. And if I'm going to lay out my critique of both your organization and the Liberty Movement, it's that if anything, maybe we haven't been fighting back hard enough. That at a certain point, that when someone calls you fraud or subjectivist or bigot, and then I hear these objectivists complain about how people from your organization have been treating them. Well, calling us frauds and subjectivists is mistreating us too. And once you've treated us so badly, then we're going to hold you to a single standard, and it's going to be part of these generalized peace talks that we're all going to calm down, and not before then.
Yeah.
Well, I take things personally.
Yeah, right. Yes, in some recent correspondence between the principals at the Ayn Rand Institute and our board members and Jennifer Grossman, our CEO, at the Atlas Society, there's a kind of throwaway line you sometimes get in their letters. Well, we have trouble dealing with the fraudulent, and I've
they better not say that to me.
Yeah, right. I just said that anyone who says that of me or of the Atlas Society or anyone connected with it, that's where the conversation stops, right at the beginning, because that's not how you start That is not how you start a conversation. That's a moral judgment, and you get to it by naming your evidence if you have any first. And if you're just in, I mean, in social terms, I mean, I mean, Scott, you're in banking. I don't know your business, but if you want to make a deal as a banker with a client or about a loan or whatever, and you go to a meeting and you say, well, first of all, I don't trust you, rather I can throw you, but let's talk.
Yeah,
Well,
it turns
no.
out that not calling them frauds is they they really don't want us to do that.
Yeah. Well, the social ethics at your bank are a little better than what objectivists have often practiced. So anyway, to me, that's a non-starter. But
Yeah,
I've got, as you said, I've been hearing crap like that for 30 years. And
just following up with that analogy a little bit, I'm curious. I said this to a previous guest that was ARI friendly, that do you think it's fair to say that ARI was slow to see the threat of cancel culture because they kind of sympathized with the practice of disappearing those whose ideas they disagreed with, whether it's calling them frauds or telling people not to read them books or the left calling us bigots?
And
So, I mean, was it, isn't that part of why ARI was, I think, slow to see the threat of cancel culture? Yaron, I mean, really just started, he changed, learned the definition of it in the last few months in February.
Oh, well, the interesting thing is that what we now call cancel culture is about as old as religion is. And they used to burn the people they wanted to cancel in the Middle Ages, but now cancel culture is you see it in the Freudians canceled Carl Jung, in the sense that while Freud was alive anyway, you not only couldn't believe what Jung did, but you couldn't deal with it. And our Marxism is full of those things. And objectivists, for sure. Every split, someone has disappeared down the memory hole. So, yeah, I got canceled. They didn't call it that. They called it sanction. And actually, cancel culture is kind of a term by the enemies of such a culture. I don't know how many left people on the left who do it would say, oh, yeah, it's time to cancel you. No, they said, we can't talk with you. You're past redemption or whatever.
Right.
But look, cancel culture is nothing new. We just have a new name for it. And yes, the objectivist movement has practiced it in spades for decades.
It's more pronounced than it was 30 years ago, and it's coming mostly from one side.
Right. Yeah.
How do you respond to the argument that any ideological movement needs standards for who can be part of that movement? And in this regard, we're talking about ARI's organization, and they're leading the movement. I guess they would say that someone needs to decide the standards for, what is an acceptable objectivist to be a speaker for that organization. And this came up with the schism with Craig Biddle as well. How do you respond to the standards question?
Well, I would respond by making a distinction. Any organization has to have operating principles and standards for everything it does, for hiring, the products it promotes, the ideas it promotes, the funding it seeks, etc. And we do too at the Atlas Society. We have very clear standards. But in intellectual movement, the standards are the only real ultimate standard is reality. people, ideas develop over time in a marketplace of ideas. The most persuasive versions, ideally, will gain the most adherence and have the most traction over time. They will become more and more understood to be part of that a movement. And you see that in every branch of science, for example. But there's no leader. There are awards where, like Nobel Prizes for different areas in science, where people who are knowledgeable about the field say, okay, here's our view about who the great contributors have been. But that even the Nobel Prize doesn't make them great. What makes them great is the work they did and the recognition of that work by their peers. So in that sense, objectivism is, I as a philosophy, as a movement, I would say, is analogous to a science. The only way you link those two senses of standard setting are if you think one group is in charge of a branch of knowledge or a philosophy in this case. And I don't. I've said, over the years, we've talked a lot about, well, maybe ARI and TAS could find a way to merge, and there should be just one organization. And my answer every time is no, there should be hundreds of organizations, all doing their own thing, just as the way there are hundreds of libertarian organizations. And the best run and most productive and persuasive, like Cato, rise to the top, but they're not trying to take over anyone else. They're actually, as a sideline, they've been extremely helpful. Certainly under Ed Crane, extremely helpful to us and to many other organizations. So that's the kind of working relationship that I would like to see. It's ridiculous to have this conflict where the two highly knowledgeable sets of people refuse to talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm a grudge holder myself, so just in that sense, I relate to it, but I don't pretend that it's part of my rational side. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're somewhat retired. Jennifer Grossman, CEO of the Atlas Society. I was unsure of her at first, but I think I've mentioned one of the ideas I'm pursuing is how philosophy with life as the standard of value should be championing the life extension movement. And she is really doing that. I've seen, Diamandis was at last year's gala, and Peter Thiel's at this year's, and she seems to get that connection, which I'm glad about. I've also seen you on YouTube videos for Atlas Society and even on Clubhouse. Any projects that you're working on, or even thoughts about the objectivist movement, in retrospect?
Well, I will say, first of all, I mentioned earlier that when you asked about the the daunting task of starting the organization 30 years ago, that, I've never thought I was a great fundraiser, administrator, manager, or strategist. And so I got us to a certain point. Jennifer's taken us, a whole nother level. And she has all those talents that, so working with her, as I can do my specialty, which is philosophical, and being a philosophical watchdog for things that we publish. But she's doing a great job on managing and expanding the organization. What I'm doing now, I'm doing a couple of projects for the Atlas Society. One is we're coming out shortly with a book of essays by Walter Donway, former board member of the Atlas Society. He's a writer, done a lot of fiction writing, and he's writing a series of essays on romanticism in literature as an art form, writing an intro to it. But the main thing I'm doing is several years ago, we published a volume called Myths About Ayn Rand. It was somewhat tied into the release of the movies, which were denounced. We kind of knew what we were going to do with critics. So we prepared this book of essays. We're expanding that, updating it, adding some new myths. And so I'm the key writer on that with help from some researchers. But the main thing, through last August and continuing throughout the fall, I was working on a new edition of my logic textbook, The Art of Reasoning. So I still, that came out in the fall, and we're still trying to promote it. The publisher is doing most of the work on that front, but that had taken up pretty much the bulk of my time. Now that it's done, I'm getting back into writing some epistemology, and I've got a whole list of topics I want to address.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing new material from you. I want to thank you just for your role in the movement over the years. And, like I said, I'm a Mavericks maverick, so I can relate. And it's funny, I heard Marcia Enright was doing some sort of seminar about some of Rand's works, Brandon's, even yours. And I tried getting in it. They said it was only open to college students. So someone needs to tell her I get crazy when I'm kicked out of a group I think I have a right to be in. But no, thank you so much. William, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, David, for coming on our little podcast here. I enjoyed our conversation very much, and thanks for clarifying some of your views. And I think I'm going to have to chew on all the things you said and think about it in a much deeper way. I'll just leave you with one thought I had about schisms. And I think that at a psychological level, schisms might be a way to evade problems with your own philosophy. I think in this case, I think there are mistakes Ayn Rand made. I think there are potential errors in the philosophy, not a whole lot, but maybe some applications or factual mistakes she made. And maybe the schisms are based on evading those issues. And so what I'd like to see is more debate, more criticism of our own ideas, and trying to figure out what's right and wrong with Rand's ideas. And that requires all of us coming together and debating these issues. So I appreciate your injection of the open philosophy argument. And I'm not sure I agree with it, but I certainly want to understand it. And I look forward to talking to you about it in the future.
Well, thank you both. It's been a pleasure. And we could talk for a lot more time, but I do have to get back to a few things. So good luck with this.
Thank you so much. And yes, maybe we'll have occasion to have you on in the future, but keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for being out there. I'm Scott Schuff, along with William Swig. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you again next time.